Good morning. Today we're going to talk about resilience in prayer and in our lives, actually, the capacity for resilience and how often it actually comes out of a place of surrounding adversity. We're going to look at the life of Isaac today. Isaac is a Bible character that's Abraham's son. We spoke of Abraham yesterday. And today we're going to be looking, his life spans multiple chapters in Genesis, but we're going to focus on one as he's later in his life with his wife in a new place. His father's now passed away. He's not there around anymore. And he's in this new place. And Isaac is in chapter 26. Isaac is in a new place and a famine in this new land that God has called him into. And now a famine hits. And his instinct is to go south to Egypt. But God specifically tells him in chapter 26, verse 2, that the Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Dwell in the land of which I will tell you. Sojourn in this land, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and to your offspring I will give all these lands, and I will establish the oath that I swore to Abraham your father." So what's going on here is that the promise that we heard of yesterday with Abraham is being passed on. And his faithfulness, Abraham's faithfulness, has been passed on to Isaac. But in Isaac's life, if I look at Isaac's life, there's so much adversity that happens in his life. There's a lot of things that happen, and he's not even he doesn't speak a lot in these stories. There's a lot of stories about him or around him. But there's very few that he's the central character actually. And this story, this time, is where he is in the midst of a famine, and then he's sent away. His instinct is to go away, go to Egypt, but God says, "Stay put." And as he's in this area, all of a sudden, the people around him begin to get more and more nervous of him and start pushing against him. Maybe you felt like this in different work environments or family environments or something, where it seems like every time and every effort you do is actually getting rejected, and they're more and more suspicious and concerned of you. So he actually has to move from the place he originally was at and goes down into a valley that seems fertile. He goes there. They set up their space, and they do this huge work of building a well. A well in the ancient Near Eastern world was not something that was easily done. It's a big affair. It took multiple men, multiple weeks, maybe even months, to build that and to build a well deep enough to get fresh water and to be a freshwater source. A lot of the people were nomadic at the time, and they traveled around and they lived around water sources. So to make a water source was quite an endeavor, and it gave people a constant place of water for people and also their livestock, so they could stay put. So they oftentimes built cities actually around these wells. And so they build the first well, and they immediately, the people around him, reject him and say, "This is our well, this is our water, you got to go somewhere else." So they did all that work. And then they did it again. They went down a little farther down the road, and they built in this valley another well, a second well. And it's a huge undertaking. It took several, probably months to do this and get it ready. And so when it's done, then the people of the area say, "Hey, this is our well. You got to get out of here." They kick him out again. And so the third time they move down the way, and they go and build this well. And finally, there's no one claiming it, and they're able to be there, and they call it Rehoboth, which means now there's room for us to prosper. It's kind of a prayer to God. And then that night, God speaks to him after he builds that well. He says this, "From there he went up to Beersheba, and the Lord appeared to him that same night and said, 'I am the God of Abraham your father. Fear not, for I am with you, and will bless you and multiply your offspring for my servant Abraham's sake.'" And so in chapter 26 of Genesis and 25, Isaac hears that prayer. And then verse 25, it says, Isaac built an altar there and called upon the name of the Lord, which is prayer. And he pitched his tent there. And there, Isaac, his servants, dug another well. What happened was, as he was being persistent in doing what he was following through with what God had called him to do, he had adversity after adversity after adversity. And it was seen by the way of his effort in building these wells. I wonder if there's been wells in your life that have been places of a sense rejection. When you're doing what you think God's calling you into, and it feels like you have roadblock after roadblock. That's one of the places of the wells. But there's another place too, as God affirms the call he said earlier in the chapter. This may have been years later, right? He affirms it. Isaac does something very important. He builds an altar so that this would also be a place to be reminded to pray. And so it's both these places of memories of adversity where he's had to dig wells that oftentimes had been a great effort and rejected, it seems like, with the surrounding adversity around him. And then a sense of a place, an altar, where he's pitched his tent. They've built a new city, Beersheba actually, and then around that space have a new well. There's places of wells of effort that oftentimes are rejected, but in that there's adversity that's built and reminders of God's presence among them. Fear not, I am with you. And I think in the midst of adversity, what we really believe about God and those words that he says to Isaac and also to us is most clearly seen. Where are the places, I want to invite you now, with time with God, where are the places that you have dug wells, that you've done things that felt have rejected by people around, that you sense God has called you into? And where are the places where God has affirmed and maybe even built a resilience from that adversity toward praying and living a life honorable to God? I want you to have a conversation with God. Talk to God about those places in your own life where adversity's been there, and maybe even times of affirmation and reminder that God has fulfilled and will keep fulfilling that promise. I hope to see you tomorrow. Bye for now.